Shabbat shalom. Shalom. So it's a story I don't often share or talk about, but I remember being just 6 years old and sitting with my class in the library of the Jewish day school that we attended in my hometown of Sydney, Australia, when suddenly a siren went off. It was loud and unexpected and wailing, and the ensuing chaos made even a small child understand that this was not a drill, but something real. I don't recall much from those next panicked moments, but I do have some fleeting flashbacks, including my teacher grabbing my wrist and dragging me along with her, gathering in the park next to the school, and seeing my younger brother, who was preschool-aged in the preschool at the time, breathing a sigh of relief that he was accounted for. I tell this story because shortly afterwards, we found out that this incident was caused by someone somewhere phoning in and falsely declaring that a bomb had been planted on the premises. I mention this story because when I hear about the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arresting a young person in an alleged terror plot targeting the Jewish community in Ottawa just a week ago or so, my mind was cast back to that day as a first grader, and it feels like some things simply don't or haven't changed, no matter where in the world we live or how many years go by. So we know that anti-Semitism is alive and well and real in this day too. We have heard the valid concerns and anxieties and fears of you, our good people, who we have taken the responsibility to care and protect, as well as our community at large in the 2+ short months since October 7. We know that anti-Semitism is alive and well and real, with many other examples having littered our news feeds as of late, whether it's the vandalism or the boycott of the Indigo store at Bay and Bloor, the windows of the Starbucks at Bathurst and Eglinton, just up that way, being smashed, the Chanukiah at City Hall in Winnipeg being temporarily removed to keep it safe during what was an alleged peaceful protest, and indeed Chat being evacuated. Another Jewish day school faced with a bomb threat, this time in Toronto in 2023. It's not just our imaginations either, with the Toronto Police providing the latest statistics and revealing that from October 7 to December 17 of this year, 53% of hate crimes committed were anti-Semitic in nature. So it's poignant then that our parasha, this Shabbat, Vayigash, as our protagonist Joseph is reunited with his brothers, his first reaction is to cry. After decades without them, having raised himself up from the pit after being sold as a slave to Egypt and then becoming the viceroy of that nation. The book of Genesis from which we read, which Robert read so beautifully from, tells us that Vayiten et kolo bivechi vayishmeu Mitzrayim vayishma beit Paro. His, meaning Joseph's, sobs were so loud that the Egyptians could hear, and so the news reached Pharaoh's palace. It was heard in Pharaoh's palace. In essence, Joseph's instinct, whether from compassion, frustration, shock, or fear, each idea of which our Midrash will point to, is to weep. So overwhelmed and so direly in need of that release of emotion was he. Today, through Joseph's tears, we are given this framework through which we can question this current, unwelcome, and unpleasant phenomenon, which may help us with our own emotional catharsis and help us look forward at this heightened period in all our lives. So the first question we need to ask ourselves is basic but necessary, which is, what is anti-Semitism? in her excellent 2018 book, Anti-Semitism Here and Now, leading scholar and diplomat Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt outlines her criteria, including this idea of knowing it when we see it or feel it. Lipstadt points out, though, that this only works when we recognize that this intrinsic sense relies on a particular perception of Jewish people expressed as hatred towards Jews and or their property, their institutions or facilities, as per the definition of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Lipstadt continues, bringing in sociologist Helen Fine's additional elements that this might result in hostility towards the Jews, whether in culture, such as myths or ideology or imagery, or in action, for example, in legal discrimination or violence against Jews, which is designed to, quote, distance, displace, or destroy Jews as Jews, end quote. Put differently, or in addition, it's not a one-off event. It's persistent and historical, and though its manifestation may evolve, its essence stays the same. We may then ask, why does this current iteration of anti-Semitism hurt in that particularly painful manner which we have been feeling? This might be best summed up by Anthony Blinken, the American Secretary of State, who was quoted this week as saying, "As we hear many countries urging an end to this conflict, I hear virtually no one demanding of Hamas that it stop hiding behind civilians, that it lay down its arms or surrender, that it surrender. This is over tomorrow if Hamas does that. How can it be that there are no demands made of the aggressor and only demands made of the victim?" Put differently, it hurts that at a time in which we as Jews need some sympathy and need space to mourn and express our own emotion following the trauma and pain inflicted by October 7th, we as Ohavei Yisrael, lovers of Israel, are the ones expected to negotiate with the terrorist organization who carried out this horrendous tragedy, to come to an agreement of terms with them, and to be the ones to stop fighting, regardless of the remaining hostages, regardless if we want this fighting to be different, and regardless of the full knowledge that Hamas would take the lull as an opportunity to plot the next attack and the next. In other words, when we have been crying tears as our ancestor Joseph did, it has felt like our cries have neither been heard nor answered. The better question might then become, what can we do about it? As always, our Torah can provide a path of guidance, and that's what I want to focus on right now. Earlier this week, your senior leadership team spent a day together on our mid-year retreat, in which we took the chance to study, process, and enjoy each other's company as we reflected on the past 6 months at Holy Blossom and looked ahead to the next 6 months. Rabbi Splansky brought us some passages from this very parasha, Parashat Vayigash, and taught us that it is, in fact, the origin of our famous phrase, Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel lives. Immediately following his emotional outburst, the next verse has Joseph asking, Ha'od avi chai, is my father still alive? Referring to Jacob and leaving his brothers dumbfounded. Joseph quickly reassures his brothers that he is peaceably inclined towards them, in the words of Rashi, and commands them to bring their father to Egypt in order to reunite. Later in the same chapter, the brothers bring the happy news to Jacob, Od Yosef Chai, Joseph is still alive. It is said that the spirit of Jacob, now in his old age, is then revived, so much so that he declares, Od Yosef beni Chai, my son Joseph is still alive. And he musters the energy to reunite with his favorite son after decades of uncertainty over his fate. This pattern of our ancestors inquiring about and celebrating their livelihood gave rise to that mantra of our people, Am Yisrael Chai. I will be honest in admitting that we may potentially still be found in our own form of Egypt for a while yet. That is to say, things might get harder before they get easier. The longer this war goes on and the less tenable and less sustainable it becomes. However, we must subsequently ask ourselves, what will enable us to find life? And by that, I mean the hope and comfort of some practical steps we can take and some bright spots that we can look at as we continue to combat anti-Semitism in all its forms. Of course, the first basic thing to do is if you see something, say something, call the UJA if you witness or experience anything, and of course, the police for anything urgent. God willing, we don't even need to address or think about that. The next would be to echo Rabbi Splansky's sentiment from her rabbinic reflection this week to call or write to our elected officials. After Shabbat, you can take a look at our website, at her rabbinic reflection for the listings of your local members and government officials. You can draw inspiration from other letters included that serve as models from ARTSA, our Reform Zionist organization, from the Reform Rabbis of Canada, and so on. And you can let your leaders, our leaders, know what is on your mind and how you are feeling at this troubling, challenging time. On that note, we can take hope from the recent appointment immediately following October 7 of Deborah Lyons, the Special Envoy on Preserving Holocaust Remembrance and Combating Anti-Semitism. This was on my mind because we received a communique from her office on Thursday in which she outlined her role and her new role and mandate. It looks like interacting with our Canadian institutions and stakeholders, both here at home and internationally, to encourage the adoption of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which is widely seen as the global gold standard, and to promote Holocaust education and research, as well as provide guidance to the Government of Canada for combating anti-Semitism. Her priorities over the coming months, including meeting with law enforcement, school boards, and Canadian universities to ensure that our campuses and classrooms are safe and respectful environments where the lines between hate speech, expressing dissenting views, and anti-Semitism are clearly drawn. We wish her b'hatzlacha on her tasks. We can take a part of this advocacy power into our own hands too and do some of the hard but important work of building bridges right here at home in Toronto. Some recent examples include our interfaith gathering held with Timothy Eaton Memorial Church, Grace Church on the Hill, and our partners at Beth Tzedek, in which we held in November an evening of prayer, song, and solidarity. Gifts of Light at the beginning of December was another fantastic example, with people of all faiths and backgrounds singing together in our sanctuary to benefit Ve'ahavta and their work to reduce poverty here in Toronto. And this coming Monday, we are actually answering the call from our friends at Metropolitan Community Church, whose Reverend Dina Dudley was our guest at Gifts of Light. She reached out to ask us whether we could contribute some side dishes for a 500-person Christmas dinner they're hosting on Monday evening for the refugee population in the area. Whilst we couldn't promise that we could prep food in time, we were able to answer the call with kindness, literally with kugels from our Kugel Kindness program. And we are so glad that we could enhance the holiday season for people in need and to continue building on the foundation of this friendship we've established. Thank you also to Sandy Smith, one of the coordinators for Kugel Kindness, for enabling us to use some of those kugels and spread some kindness. Holy Blossom is also, naturally, taking measures to ensure that whilst you are in our building, you are secure. You may have noticed, especially at large community events, that we do take some steps such as hiring extra security personnel. Your bags might be checked, and you cannot simply walk into the building anymore without a swipe card, because we are keeping the doors locked both externally and internally too. So you can't, for example, just walk across this bridge into the education area. Proportionate to the level of threat, these are small added steps that go a long way in helping us all feel protected whilst we're on our premises and allow us to live our Jewish lives fully and joyfully. So with that in mind, the final step we can take is probably the most critical of all: to be proudly and unapologetically Jewish. When reflecting on the meaning of Am Yisrael Chai as a team, we as the senior leadership reflected that, especially now, it appears or reads almost as a cry of defiance, a cry of pride, a cry of unity. So let us take this spirit into this new secular year and renew that commitment to Jewish life even in the face of adversity. Attend services like you are doing today and bring your friends along, Jewish and non-Jewish. Show up for smachot, send your children to our religious school, perhaps buy from Jewish-owned businesses like the boycott that took place at Indigo. Show up like you did in Ottawa and show up for each other. For as a people that are all too aware of what it means, as the saying goes, to laugh with one eye and cry like Joseph with the other, we know that this is what it means to truly proclaim Am Yisrael Chai. Shabbat Shalom.